Think of a refugee. You probably have in your mind a victim, somebody who's lost everything, their home, their job, their assets, even their sense of hope. I believe it's possible to turn that image right around, to think of refugees as masters of their own destiny, connected to opportunity, writing their own script. But it will require big changes in how we think about and deliver humanitarian aid. The inspiration for this conversation came from two meetings that I had with refugees. The first was about a decade ago. I just started working in the Foreign Office, and I was working as the advisor to the Foreign Secretary, and I was on my very first trip to Pakistan. I was going to be meeting some young men who'd fled the border with Afghanistan, a place called Waziristan. Before the trip, I had a briefing from a very senior diplomat. He warned me. He said to me, "The people you're going to be meeting are tribal Pashtuns. Their aspirations are different to ours. Their horizons are more limited. They are inward-looking." So when I walked over to meet the men in Waziristan, I was really primed for a conversation about tribal affiliation. But literally, do you know what the first thing they said to me was? "Are you on the Facebook?" And by the end of the meeting, I had 10 friend requests and a couple of pokes. Part of the reason why I actually remember this story is that I had to go back home immediately afterwards for my security clearance interview in the Foreign Office. And normally those are really embarrassing affairs where they ask you about whether you've ever taken drugs or whether you've looked at porn. But my interview was almost entirely about, why do I have so many Facebook friends from this place called Waziristan? The men I met there were angry and frustrated. They felt attacked by all sides, by the terrorists, by the Pakistani government, and by us. And by the way, if there was one thing worse than meeting a British official, it was meeting a British official who was Indian. All of that anger and frustration was to be expected. But what surprised me, changed my mind, and led to what I want to talk about today, is that they were frustrated at the kind of help they were getting. They were frustrated that they were given food rations every single day, the same food, when what they really wanted was just a bar of soap to be able to have a wash. And more than even an unappetizing handout, what they really wanted was a job, a chance to continue their education, some connections that could help them move up in the world. They wanted what we all want. Those aspirations may not seem surprising. But when I started working in a humanitarian organization, I quickly realized that the very things that those people valued, money to buy things, opportunities to work and learn, and social networks, were not the focus of humanitarian work. And those things really matter, and that was really brought home to me in the second conversation that I want to talk to you about, and that was with someone more close to home. My dad fled Burma during the Second World War when the Japanese invaded. He left on foot and walked pretty much all the way to southern India, Madras, back to his ancestral home. That's a picture of him there when he was about 8 years old. Soon after, he lost both of his parents. I've often asked him, what made the difference between success and failure? How did you overcome the odds? His answer was pretty simple. When he was orphaned, the eldest brother got a job, which managed to bring all 6 siblings back under one home. He got into a great school, Madras Christian College. He had friends and family who gave him not just material support, but fired his imagination, his aspirations. And while they didn't have much money, it was theirs to spend. So they chose, as a family, to live in one room. And my dad only had 2 shirts, even at medical school, which his little brother would cycle every day to clean, just so that the family could spend as much money as possible on getting the best education possible. Today, my dad lives and thrives here in London. He's just celebrated 50 years working as a consultant radiologist in the National Health Service. He even gets to attend TED Talks. So, hello, Dad. So those very things that my dad benefited from were exactly what the Waziristan men wanted. Money to buy things, opportunities to work and learn, and social networks. So why are they not part of the bloodstream of humanitarian work? It's because the humanitarian industry is founded on some outdated assumptions. If you think of the average refugee being displaced for a few weeks or months, then it might make sense to give them temporary food, shelter, short-term relief. But the average refugee is now displaced for a decade. So therefore, education and jobs, they become necessities. And yet just 2% of humanitarian funding goes on education. If you think of the average refugee as living in a place like this, a camp in the middle of nowhere, cut off from all markets, then again, it might make sense to ship in foods and services, food and goods. But when the average refugee lives in a town and city, in a country that's not rich but not poor either, but middle income, places like Jordan, Kenya, Turkey, Lebanon, Pakistan, then it makes no sense to create a parallel planned economy and parachute in separate services. Far better to give people cash and let them integrate into society. So what would it look like if we entirely redesigned the humanitarian system around the actual aspirations of refugees? Money to buy things, opportunities to work and learn, and social networks. You've probably heard of the saying that the biggest accommodation provider in the world today owns no hotels, Airbnb. The biggest taxi firm in the world owns no taxis, Uber. So perhaps the biggest aid organization in the future will deliver no food drops, provide no shelter, and even have the fewest aid workers. So what would it look like? Let's imagine the actual process. Imagine you are a refugee. You've lost everything: your home, your assets, your identity. You register with the UN and you get 5 things, all on your mobile phone. First, you get a biometric ID. So instead of clutching your security papers, your identity papers, for fear of losing all entitlement to services, you know that you will have a right to aid and help. Secondly, you get a work permit. So instead of being unemployed or forced to work illegally and fear deportation, you have a right to work. Thirdly, you get cash in the form of mobile money so that you choose the food you eat, you choose the clothes you wear, rather than have someone like me choose them for you. Fourth, you get electronic vouchers to enable you to get into a health clinic and a government school. So rather than the money trickling down the UN and through the different agencies, the money goes direct to you and you get to choose where you go to. And finally, you get some apps that help you to help yourself. So you get a reading app that uses voice recognition software to listen to your child and provide tailored instruction on how to increase the reading level. Or an imaging app that does some basic health diagnostics and refers you to the right clinic. Or social networking apps that connect you to mentors, sponsors, and even employers. It's a world where the resources go direct to refugees, where services are accountable downwards to them rather than upwards to donors. You might be wondering just how feasible, how realistic is all this? Well, the good news is that most of what I've said today is either happening in a small way or we have the technology to make it happen. Give Directly is an organization which transfers money from you as a donor to individuals in Kenya and Uganda on their mobile phone. It cuts out all the middlemen, and as a result, it costs just 9 cents in every dollar to find and reach those individuals. And now lots of humanitarian organizations, like the IRC where I work, are following suit. And the evidence is showing that when you give people that money, they use it wisely. Or how about jobs? Possibly the hardest proposal I'm talking about today, the right to work. That is happening in Uganda, it's happening in Kyrgyzstan, and in Jordan, for firms that recruit 25% of their workforce, they get the barriers to the European Union torn down. That creates a brilliant incentive for them to actually recruit refugees. So what would it take to get these seeds of the solution to really flourish? Two things really need to happen from donors. Firstly, instead of earmarking aid for particular things like food, they need to let go and just have confidence in refugees spending their own money. So instead of having a world food program, we need a world cash program. And secondly, we won't develop these innovative services unless we take risks. Now, in some industries, they spend up to 10% of their whole income on generating innovations, on R&D, the next life-saving cancer drug. We should ask ourselves, what would it take to do that in the humanitarian industry? What if 10% of the $25 million of aid budget could be invested in R&D? The prize, if we get this right, is enormous. I know there are places where what I've said today will not work. South Sudan, Central African Republic, where the infrastructure and connectivity is so weak that you need more traditional solutions. And by the way, if humanitarian organizations could focus just on those places, they'd be able to do an even better job. But the majority of the 21 million refugees in the world today live in middle-income places and are displaced for months, for years. I take you back to that promise I started with. We can turn around the way we think about aid. We can give refugees money to buy things, opportunities to work and learn, and social networks. And it's affordable. If we gave every single refugee in the world $2 a day, the equivalent of $2 a day, that would cost around $9 billion a year. A lot of money, but far less than even the UK alone spends on aid. And the biggest difference that would make is not in something you can touch or feel or measure. It's in something far less tangible. My dad once said to me that when he was given opportunities and choices, the freedom to make his own decisions, when people placed their confidence in him, that is when he gained the confidence to aim high, to lead his own conversation, to write his own script. And that's really what our giving ought to be about. To not just alleviate suffering, but to build hope. Thank you.